Trainers Network. Turn this off. Presentations sponsored by the Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition. My name is Adam Pledge. I'm the Southern Tier SolarWorks Program Manager. I want to acknowledge in the room BRISC's Board Chair, Chris Berger. In a few minutes, we're going to get started with what you came to hear. First, I just want to say a few words about our program and the context for this presentation. The Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition started in 2008. We're an educational nonprofit that works with community partners across the region to build prosperity and resilience. We have programs in local food, in local business, and in clean energy. The reason that we decided to host these events is that since 2014, we have been promoting solar through our Southern Tier SolarWorks program across now 5 counties: Brewtaga, Shenango, Delaware, Otsego. We're part of a larger project funded by NYSERDA, where these guys are also from, called Renewable New York. That's a 15-county, 3-year project that goes from Rockland all the way to Schuyler and Steuben. The purpose of this is twofold. One is to animate the solar market. Translated, that means have a lot of solar deployed and a lot of people getting jobs doing it. And also working with educational training institutions and installers to improve our offerings so that people who are in this area can get those jobs to install solar in this area. Now, as far as this particular set of trainings, some months ago, the Public Service Commission enabled regulation allowing for the first time something called community shared solar. And by the end of this presentation, you'll all have a flyer in front of you that talks about that from the perspective of folks who might want to actually do that. The reason why community shared solar is important is because without community shared solar, you need to have property. The property needs to have a good site, and you need to have the credit or the financial wherewithal to do that. I'm an example of somebody who has that last thing, but I have a lousy site. I have a geothermal system, I heat with electricity, but I can't deploy solar. But the important folks here really are not people like me, renters, transients, low and moderate income people. They can all go through solar through community shared solar because it essentially is like a CSA for solar. That is, you buy in or you subscribe to solar on somebody else's property, and your usage is offset by that. So that's really the payoff here is it's full solar for everyone. Well, we had a few speed bumps on the way. Practically speaking, even though the commission ruled last July, it was really the spring when things could really start happening across the state. The company I will not name decided in their wisdom to rain a bunch of lease offers down all over the state. And landowners were looking at this and getting a little bit of deja vu all over again, going off to Department of Extension, to the Farm Bureau, to many of you, I expect, local officials, and saying, well, what about this? Sadly, at that time, the resources, the information resources were not available, which they are now. And I believe that these folks have brought along a landowner one-pager, and we also have available a model law for local municipalities that are looking to update their zoning. That's a 30-pager, so that is available electronically. Many of you received that via email from me. If you did not, that is currently available on our website. Website is on those pretty little cards that have 2 events on them, on the front side, southerntiersolarworks.org. You go to resources, the model law is there under resources. So in reaction to this perceived crisis, there were a lot of sessions that took place to try to explain what was going on. But without the kind of information that these folks are bringing, those were a bit uneven. So what we're trying to do here today is to bring information that's been vetted, you can trust, and you can pepper away with questions once the presentation is done. Because we really want local officials and others in this room to have the tools they need to be able to regulate this activity where and how it's appropriate. And believe me, we get it. I live in a town, we're actually doing a little better than some, but I know that John Schaefer is in the room and he has to do calisthenics to balance the budget under the 2% cap. That being said, you don't want to kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs. And as you'll discover, it's only the bigger projects where you can see some revenue through a pilot because of the fact that we have relatively low electric rates here and the incentives are not sufficient to allow a saving for the customers and profit for the contractor and for the project to pencil out. So I'll close by saying, before I introduce our speakers, that if you're interested in getting involved with our program, there's 3 ways you can do it. You can do it as a client, meaning that you want to go solar, either on your own property or through community shared solar. The second way is as an investor. There are very specific characteristics that such an investor needs, which I can talk about individually. The third way is as a landowner, because we ourselves are developing projects, as are our installer partners. And I just want to briefly recognize Vince from Southern Tier, Twin Tier. I always do this. Twin Tier Solar and Wind out of Elmira, one of our installer partners. They are partnered actually in tandem with Tatum Engineering of Ithaca, New York. Our other 2 partners are ETM Solar in Endicott and Renovus Solar in Ithaca. So with that, I'm really pleased to introduce our 2 speakers from the PV Trainers Network, Bill Overcare and Derek Meister. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Adam for getting the space for us and doing a lot of the outreach and for the work that Southern Tier Solar Works is doing on a day-to-day basis. As Adam said, my name is Bill Overcare. Together with my colleague Derek Meister, we are here through the NYSERDA's PV Trainers Network. If you can see at the bottom of this slide, there are a couple logos. Those are the main partners, Meister Consultants Group, who are based out of Boston, PACE Land Use Law Center, Sustainable CUNY of the City University of New York, and then NTech Engineering does the technical side of the PV Trainers Network in partnership with a plethora of academic institutions throughout the country. PV Trainers Network's main goal is to lower what's called soft costs and expand the adoption of solar energy throughout the state of New York. You can see all of our resources, check out our trainings, request to host a training through the link there, training.ny-sun.ny.gov. And as you can see, the program is spread out through the entire state. The stars represent the partners, the academic institution partners, so we have pretty good coverage, and we do trainings throughout the entire state of New York on a regular basis, and then including our colleague Jessica Bacher from PACE Land Use Law Center will be doing a training right here toward the end of June. We have some flyers for that going around. She's doing a training on large-scale zoning for solar energy. So if folks are interested in this, that would probably be of interest to you as well, right here on, I believe, June 29th. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Derek Meister. We are both New York State Solar Ombudsman at Sustainable CUNY for the City University of New York. My colleague, Derek, is going to take you through the beginning and what we're going to talk about today.
Thanks, Bill. So just to dive right into the agenda, we will be going over a brief overview of solar technology and incentives. I will be handing it back over to Bill in the meantime, or in the middle of it. We'll be switching back and forth a couple times throughout the presentation. So a little bit of intro to solar systems in general. Obviously, you have the panels on top of the rooftop, which then have to be connected to an inverter, which changes the electricity from DC to AC, usable for our grid and many of our appliances in our homes. The inverter is then connected to the meter, essentially in between the meter and the main panel of the house. That is called interconnection. And most of the time, almost nearly 100% of the time, systems will use net metering in order to credit the bills that are credit the energy that's supplied by the solar system to a homeowner's bill. And in general, you have kind of average size ranges for systems. Residences go on average from 5 to 10 kilowatts kilowatts. Of course, you can get smaller, you can get bigger. You have kind of smaller scale commercial that gets closer to 50 to 500 kilowatts, and that is kind of included with the factory scale over here, about 1 megawatt plus, and the large scale utility scale systems are 2 megawatts plus, and that can go up to, I've seen up to 5 kilowatts, or 5 megawatts actually. So just a background on the solar market in New York State. You can see the increase in overall solar systems installed in New York State throughout the years. It's not quite exponential, but a huge growth overall. The annual is in blue, the cumulative added together in yellow, and it's going up and up and up, and 2016 is projected to keep going, and it is not slowing down anytime soon. And in general, the work that a lot of us have done throughout the state is to reach out to municipalities, to homeowners, to educate the communities about how solar can impact not only your utility bill, but also the environment, of course. And a large part of the boom lately has been to reduce the soft costs of solar, which are nowadays the majority of the price of a solar system. Versus the old days, maybe 10 years ago, where it would be the actual equipment. But as we know, technology, kind of the advances happen, again, nearly exponentially, and the prices fall following the increases in efficiencies. But there is a little lag with the soft costs, and that includes permitting, the paperwork for customer acquisition, and those kind of externalities that you can't necessarily define up front. And going through an overall cost of a system, you can see the breakdown. The gray would technically be the actual equipment costs of a solar system, and the light blue and blue would be the overall soft costs. The light blue is actually broken down into kind of like the company's overhead and margins for profit. The darker blue is the breakdown in general of what I was mentioning earlier, the other paperwork, customer acquisition, and installation, labor. So it's pretty variable, but we are making strides in reducing kind of the confusion around the processes. Of course, in New York State, there's so many jurisdictions that companies might have to wade through, understand different authority having jurisdictions, different rules, and a lot of the times it can increase the time for installation and make it a little difficult for customers to wade through. So in moving forward with how to understand some of the overall incentives that help reduce those costs, net metering is one thing in New York State that was allowed. I think around 2011, the Public Service Commission opened up renewable energy to not be regulated like a utility, meaning that the rates that energy produced from a solar system can essentially be open to third-party financing. And with net metering specifically, that means the energy produced by the system can actually go towards a homeowner's utility bill, in most cases at a one-to-one rate with the kilowatt hours. So if the solar system produces extra kilowatt hours of energy that's not being used at the home at the time, as this graph shows, then the excess generation would be given directly back to the homeowner in the form of a one-to-one credit. So a general solar system generates the production in that kind of parabola shape in the middle, that bell curve, where, of course, in the early morning you don't have as much sun. The production increases throughout the afternoon when you get the majority of the sun beating down across the array, and of course the sun goes down after that. Production lessens out. But that's compared to the gray consumption of an average household, where it doesn't follow necessarily any kind of a general form. So overall, when people are gone at work, you might not have as much consumption, meaning that extra energy produced by a solar system within the afternoon would almost be going to waste if not for net metering. And of course, the consumption generally increases in a house towards the evening when everybody comes home. That's generally how it works. So where the two intersect, obviously the utility is not needed for the supply of electricity, but then you do still have that extra amount of electricity generated by the system. And again, overall, the net metering helps so that customers are able to receive direct benefits of the system beyond the energy itself, meaning they can still receive monetary value out of it directly. There is rollover minutes are, it's different in some cases. Sometimes different utilities will require that the generation has to be used at a certain time. Others will allow at the end of a month or a billing cycle to add up the aggregate amount of extra generation. So if a homeowner would use only a certain amount of energy at, let's say, at the end of the billing cycle would be, I think we have an actual example here. So in this example, the end of the billing cycle has an extra 100 kilowatt hours of credits. And that is added to the prior credits of 50 kilowatt hours so that you have a total cumulative of 150 kilowatt hours of credits. And that would then apply to the overall bill and hopefully would make it zero. But of course, solar credits will not offset certain charges by the utility, meaning sometimes they're called demand charges. In this case, it's called a basic service charge, and that's essentially the charge the utility adds on for utilizing the grid and the lines. And that would not be offset by solar credits because essentially the utilizing the lines means, I mean, the utility would want to make money from it at some point, so yeah, you still have to have that basic service charge. So overall incentives, we have the ITC, which is a federal tax credit. So at the end of the year, you can get a value of up to 30% of the installation costs in the form of the tax credit, but that is going to be reduced in increments through, starting in 2020, it's going to be reduced from 30% to 26%, and 22% 2021. After that, it goes down to 10%. So essentially, this is a great time to get into solar, where the incentives can almost be aggregated to the point where you can have a majority of the system costs paid for. So the federal credit is added to, in many cases, the state incentives, which are a direct performance-based cash incentive. So depending on the size of the system, you can get a certain amount of money per kilowatt of that system size. And it's broken up in between different sections, kind of generally, like we've mentioned before, the average sizes of systems. You have residential, small non-residential, large non-residential. And as you can see, instead of the average size of a residential system being 5 to 10 kilowatts, you can still apply for the state incentive as a residential customer for a system size up to 25 kilowatts. And the ranges are slightly different for small commercial and large commercial, up to 200 kilowatts for small commercial, and between 200 kilowatts and 2 megawatts only for large commercial. And you can actually see the breakdown of the state incentives here. It's set up in a way so that they have separate blocks of incentives. So once a target goal of a certain amount of installs is reached, then the incentive will drop slightly, and until that next block is filled up, you will keep going down until either the money runs out or until all the goals are met and the blocks are filled up. And you can see even specifically that how the block system works. So for a large commercial installation, in the Con Edison region, they still have a little bit to go to fill in the blocks. They're still on the first one, and that's a little under 20 megawatts. So once the aggregated installation sizes of large commercial systems reaches 20 kilowatts, or I mean, a little less than 20 megawatts, then the actual cash incentives of 63 cents a watt would go down slightly to I think the next rate is probably 50 cents per watt. But again, the goal is as you fill up the sizes, the amount of blocks of total aggregate installations, then the amount of money you get would be less and less. But of course, the rest of the state has made huge headway and has been utilizing those incentives. As you can see, they reached their target first block pretty quickly, already on the fourth. And again, the incentives would go down as you reach the higher amount of installations. But it's important to note also that the incentives are also different, especially for commercial installations, because of the different charges by utilities. Sometimes you can have just a straight monetary value of this amount of watts for this amount of money, but sometimes you might have volumetric crediting where demand charges are included. So it gets a little tricky because the demand charges vary so much. It depends on the amount of energy you use at a certain specific time, meaning you can qualify if you fall into that category for a higher incentive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting an extra amount of money because of those demand charges being so variable.
Can you define volumetric?
Yeah, so monetary would essentially be a direct kilowatt hour to kilowatt hour, whereas volumetric would be the amount of.
You want me to explain it?
Yeah,
I think Bill.
So monetary credit is it's typically for demand meters. Demand meters have non-demand charges and demand charges. The non-demand charge is based on a kilowatt hour. So what monetary crediting is you get the monetary value of that non-demand kilowatt hour. What a volumetric credit is you're getting a one-to-one, the volume of a kilowatt hour. So it's a one-to-one credit instead of the money, the value of the kilowatt hour.
Let me help you out here.
Sure.
So if your facility, because I do this on a daily basis, if your facility is going to your electricity generation is going to generate 100 kilowatt hours, whatever your meter class is, whether it's going to be directly metered, you'll have a monetary credit that's assigned to your meter, or if it's remote net metered from another location, it's a new service at the time of service in that locale, whatever that historical monetary value is. You can do an annual average, but it varies on a monthly basis. You multiply that, say it's 12 cents. The projects that I'm working on up north are 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So you take that, and now you've got, what, $1,240 of monetary credits. Those monetary credits can be applied to your supply and your demand to offset your entire bill for that month. Whereas in volumetric world, it's only the kilowatt hour charges on your bill. So you cannot offset demand with volumetric. And it's whatever your retail rate is, regardless of whether it's behind your meter or it's being remote net metered. So there's vastly different approaches with monetary versus volumetric. And you really have to have a thorough analysis done to see what your actual savings is going to be.
That is 100% accurate and a very thorough explanation. Thank you.
I'm trying to put it into really short term. Sorry to take so much time.
That's always a really tough one for us to explain because it is a really dense concept to unpack, and a lot of times things get lost in translation between the explanation and the idea of, especially when you get into remote net
I
metering.
created modeling software so that I don't have to try and figure it out my own, because it's a very complex billing process to compare the utility bill to whatever your proposal rates are going to be.
Absolutely.
The New York Sun block incentive, is that simply a
different name for NYSERDA grants?
Yes, it's the same thing. And the
One caveat though to the monetary credit survey knows is that you had to have your system installed or had it issued with your municipality by June 1st of last year. So those incentives for new projects are no longer available unless you partner with a municipality or piggyback off.
Well, for individuals, they're no longer available.
You had to have your project grandfathered by either have it in a connection application submitted by June 1st or June 30th last year.
it was June 1st.
June 1st.
Yeah.
So you either had to have or an RFP issued by then, and your project has to be completed by 2017. There are municipalities out there who have been grandfathered, and also you can also piggyback off of certain municipalities for that. However, you may not still qualify for the monetary credit unless you are able to partner with them.
It's only the monetary credit, not the project.
Right, monetary credit, if you're a demand meter, you really have to have analysis done, but it actually is, you can offset pretty much 100% of your bill, but you're offsetting your demand charges as well. So if you can find a municipality that offers that or has that available to them, it's definitely in your best interest to explore partnering in a municipal contract with them to see if you can partner with them to be part of that facility. In my head. We can talk afterwards.
Right. We're gonna.
Who am I? I do consulting work for, oh, my name's Jen.
AKA the mother of New York Solar Act.
We don't talk about that no more.
And gonna take it into the real property tax exemption, which, with the advent of shared solar, as Adam mentioned in the intro, it's a relatively new thing in New York State. It just went into practice in October of 2015. There has been a new concern with the New York State's real property tax exemption for renewable energy projects. So first, just want to give you the lay of the land of what it is. It's a real property tax exemption for solar and other renewable energy systems. And it's not a property tax exemption in the total value of your property taxes, just the added value that the solar system adds to the residence or the added value of the solar system. That is what is exempt from taxation. And special ad valorem, I'm sorry, getting back into the basics of it, the exemption lasts for 15 years, so it's not a permanent tax exemption. At the end of the 15-year period, your system is assessed for degradation, and then you're paying taxes after 15 years going forward on the system. This is a very, very important piece of legislation for especially residential solar. And we can talk about, we have quite a few slides on this, so we can talk about the ins and outs of larger scale solar versus residential solar and how the property tax exemption interacts with all of them. Municipalities throughout New York State and school districts, any taxing jurisdiction, is automatically opted in to the real property tax exemption. But because New York is a home rule state, authority having jurisdictions do have the option to opt out of this property tax exemption. Right now, more than 92% of all taxing jurisdictions in New York State are continuing to offer this real property tax exemption, and for good reason. This right here is the main reason that folks remain opt-in to the real property tax exemption. Jurisdictions that opt out might do so to try to be able to collect revenue for the municipality, but because the margins, especially the margins on solar energy projects, especially in the upstate regions where electricity is a little cheaper than downstate, the margins are pretty thin. So in order for people to be able to adopt solar, the primary driver is folks want to save money, and they are able to do that. Taxing these systems can very, very often, especially in places like Binghamton where the electricity is a little bit cheaper. Taxing the systems can often, for a smaller size system, just make the value proposition not work out for the homeowner. So in order to try to collect this revenue, you've taken a step to try to collect this revenue, but then you've made the projects not work out, so the revenue's not there to collect in the first place. That's really the main logic behind not opting out, but there are other reasons as well.
Is that also true for solar farms?
That is not true for solar farms because for residential systems, you don't achieve the same economies of scale as you do with a larger megawatt-sized project. And there is a way to get revenue from those larger solar farms without harming the residential market, without harming the entire market. But this real property tax exemption, it cannot be conditional. So you can't opt out just for a certain size project. It's all or nothing. So if you're opting out to get revenue from solar farms, then you're also opting out for residential, and it will likely, if not kill the residential solar market, it will have a severely detrimental effect on the residential solar market. Yes, sir.
Can zoning be an effective form of opt-out on a conditional basis? In other words, you zone certain types of solar, and you don't have to change the opt-out, but because you excluded it, isn't that the same effect as individual opt-out?
I am not clear on exactly how that would work because I am not the zoning expert, but Jessica Bacher from PACE is our zoning expert, and she will be here at the end of lunch. She will be able to talk to you probably for about an hour about that.
I'll hold the question until later.
Yeah, and the other thing is Sustainable CUNY just about 2 weeks ago released a model solar zoning law, and that, there you go, right there. That will have some answers too, but the typical way, which we will discuss in more detail in a few slides, the typical way that municipalities collect money on large solar projects without harming the residential market is something called a pilot payment in lieu of taxes. And I will get into that in more detail in a couple slides here. But so essentially the argument is you opt out to get tax revenue from solar, and then there's no solar because it's being taxed and it doesn't work out for the customers anymore.
Is that what they did in Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma?
Recently or in 2014?
Where they started charging people to put solar in? There was a fee per month?
Right, so that was
Sorry,
more
could you
based.
repeat the question? Yeah, actually, if you wouldn't mind, we're actually recording this, so if you could repeat questions, particularly if they're soft.
Oh, absolutely. The question was, is this about what's happening in Oklahoma? What happened in Oklahoma in 2014 was not similar to this. That was actually from the utility side. The utility was charging homeowners to interconnect to the grid in order to qualify for net metering. It's from the utility and it's not from the municipality.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about Oklahoma, and this solar is really such a bipartisan thing. A lot of people think solar and they think left. The people who beat that in Oklahoma, that legislation was actually, the utility was directed not to do that. And it was actually the Tea Party that was very instrumental in just the freedom. They wanted energy freedom. They wanted to be able to make their own decisions about where their energy is coming from. So that's one of the things that makes me really passionate about solar, is that it's such a uniting issue. People come from it from both sides of the aisle. People come to it from all walks of life, and it's just it's a way to really unite people and save some money and save the planet at the same time. I just think that's really neat. But yeah, to answer the question, that was the utility and not the state. So on with the real property tax exemption. Many folks in the room may have heard, may not have heard, that one thing that goes pretty synonymously with the solar industry in the United States is job creation in the United States. The solar really took off right toward the end of the 2008 recession, and it's been taking off ever since. It's been a great source of being able to create jobs nationally and right here in the state of New York, where we have 8,250 solar jobs, which is the third most in the United States. The policies and the incentives that are unique to New York State, and the work that NYSERDA is doing, and the support from the governor's office, and the support from municipalities and jurisdictions throughout the state really makes, that's a lot of the reason that New York has the third most solar jobs in the United States. It's a really friendly atmosphere for solar.
What is a solar job?
So solar job, great question, as defined by the Solar Foundation. The question was, what is a solar job? As defined by the Solar Foundation, where these numbers come from, they do a census every year. It is anyone who spends 50% of their time or more on solar-related activities. So that includes installations, solar installers, manufacturers, the people who are making the panels, project managers, and then there's this category called Other, which is where my colleague Derek and I fit in, and also Adam would fit into this gray area of the Other. It's kind of folks who are doing solar policy work, solar nonprofit work, but it's those four are the main: project management, installation, manufacturing, and Other.
And how do the numbers break down in those four categories?
Question was, how do the numbers break down in those four categories? Installation is by far the most, typically the most job creating. Sales, project management type jobs are second. Other is at the bottom, and manufacturing typically falls in third, but that can vary state by state. With the Solar City plant, the manufacturing plant that's supposed to go up in Buffalo, we might see in New York a flip where manufacturing jobs, especially in the Western New York region, are bigger than, say, project management jobs.
Is there a termination to this when the build-out's complete? Won't the both manufacturing and installation jobs tail off? Because there's a build-out here, right?
Absolutely.
The state's process is to get us to a certain amount of renewable, and then the credits end, correct?
Right, and that's how that megawatt block structure works. It's decreasing incentives as the market matures.
So there's going to be a build-out that will be complete. Once that build-out's complete, what happens to the installation jobs?
So the idea behind the build-out is that the market will mature, and then the incentives won't be necessary anymore. That people are going to get so used to filling out the paperwork, doing the permitting for all the jurisdictions in New York State, and getting used to these unique soft costs and be able to do that more efficiently, having had all this practice in a subsidized market, that they'll be able to do everything more efficiently, and they won't need the incentives and will still be able to offer that competitive price. But in terms of the job issues specifically, I mean, yes, there cannot be exponential growth of people installing solar panels because there's only so much space. But we are fortunate in New York to have very high demand for energy and a lot of space. I would not expect, I would be surprised to see in my lifetime curtailing of solar jobs just falling off. Curtailing of growth, absolutely. Exponential growth is really difficult to find. But we're so far away from the potential of solar energy in New York State, given our use of energy in New York State, given our consumption in New York State. Yes, there is a cap, a theoretical cap on the amount of solar jobs that will be here. It doesn't seem to me like we're anywhere near that at this point.
What's the life and obsolescence of the panels? That would add to jobs as technology evolves and panels have to be replaced.
And he's got slides on that too.
Yeah, we have some stuff on that coming up. But the standard answer for that question is panels are usually warranted for 20 to 25 years, but the lifetime of a solar panel is kind of unknown. There are panels that were launched into outer space in the 70s, still generating energy from the sun right now as we speak. So the safe answer is 20 to 25 year lifetime. That's kind of what you'll hear quite a bit. But the actual reality of the situation, they kind of last indefinitely, or they have the potential to last indefinitely as far as we know.
What about obsolescence?
So the technology doesn't improve like computers, cell phones, where they make huge bursts in short periods of time. Solar PV technology has made incremental growth over long periods of time, over the decade range. And those are increases in efficiency. That's how we measure betterment of solar PV technology. Those increases in efficiency are very small, and they take a very long time because it's a complex technology. So the trend has been in the solar boom, as I like to call it, since about 2010. The price has been falling. The efficiency has not really been improving at the same rate. The reason that solar is taking off is not because of an improvement in the technology, it's because the technology is becoming more affordable. And I think that's an important distinction to be able to make. But the way the technology itself improves in terms of obsolescence of panels, incremental improvements over long periods of time. That's what we've seen since the 50s for solar.
Just want to briefly mention that these slides will be available on the PV Trainers website probably pretty soon, and they're going to be available on our site this afternoon.
And just back into jobs, we have 631 solar companies, and this is New York, which is fourth most in the U.S. And sure, there are solar cities out there. There are Sunjevities, the big ones. But those are 2 of 631. A vast majority of these companies throughout New York State are small local businesses. And that's another thing about solar and how it interacts with the local economy. You can't ship your house to China, have solar panels installed, and then have it shipped back. All the jobs that solar creates are necessarily local jobs. You need to have someone in the area to be able to perform them. So that's pretty unique to the solar industry, that it can really bolster the local economy. And the value of the solar energy industry for 2015 in New York State was nearly $1 billion, 877 million. So it's contributing quite a bit to the state economy. And through that spending, through that industry, there are indirect impacts of solar projects as well. So think of it, we think of it, and actually wrote a little piece on this. Think of it like a construction project, because that's essentially what it is. You've got folks who are building a house in town. They're in town. They're spending money at restaurants. They're going to they're going to all the local shops. They're eating in town. They're in the area, making money and spending money. That can be a really substantial source of tax revenue, and as we see in a lot of cases, the tax revenue generated from the local indirect spending that the solar industry brings into a community, would not be surprising to see that revenue be greater than the revenue that you would be getting if you were to opt out of the tax exemption to try to get this revenue, and then there's no solar to tax because people the margins aren't good enough for them. So this, for the economic argument, that local indirect spending is hugely important when you're thinking about the property tax exemption, because all of that spending is being taxed. That is not opted out, and that will be happening if there's a robust solar energy industry in town. Now we're going to do the deep dive into payment in lieu of taxes, or pilot. So this is the mechanism by which municipalities and jurisdictions can generate revenue from these large solar farm projects without harming the residential solar market. So where there are large installations, there are economies of scale at play. There are certain fixed costs within an installation. The permitting, the paperwork costs, the labor, the interconnection fees, the interconnection study. Those are all costs that are just a one-time cost. So when you have larger installations, those costs remain constant, whereas with the smaller installations, it's still the same cost for all those things. It's just a much larger chunk of the overall cost of the system. So what the real property tax exemption allows municipalities to do is require a payment in lieu of taxes if they remain opted in to the property tax exemption. So if you opt out, you cannot, and tax people for solar, you cannot obviously also get a payment in lieu of taxes. This is only available for those who remain opted in. Yes, sir.
When can the taxing municipality or jurisdiction assert their right to have a pilot agreement?
So that is something that I am not 100% clear on. We've been having this discussion internally through PVTN for quite a while, and it's not necessarily clear to me. But what is clear is the language of Section 487 of the real property tax exemption is explicit. It says jurisdictions are allowed to require. That is the direct language. So pilots are an effective mechanism for being able to capture that revenue on these larger systems. But the means of requiring it and how jurisdictions go about that, in a lot of ways, that is up to them. And if you are able to attend when Jessica speaks, she has a lot of great things to say about that topic as well. And I would definitely, it would be valuable to run that by her too.
I also have a name of a general municipal
putting an unreasonable pilot?
Pilots are not allowed to be more than you would have paid in taxes. Pilots are not allowed to be more than the tax revenue you would have gotten if you taxed the project.
How do you know how much tax revenue you would have if you don't have an assessment?
You would be able to have an assessment, I believe.
So an assessment has to be made no matter what, so you know that you don't exceed it in your pilot?
I believe that is the way it works, but I think there's kind of gray area in this law. It's just, the rule is you can't charge more. So however, the way I believe that it works, and I am not an attorney, is kind of just, that's the rule, and I feel like you wouldn't necessarily need to have an assessment for each one, because you could estimate, what it's going to be, and as long as the contractor, the developer for the project, and the municipality agree on this payment in lieu of taxes, there's probably not going to be a need a lot of times. And in the next slide, I have a few example pilots, and you'll be able to see. Yes, sir.
But if you can tax up to the assessed value, why don't you just opt out and receive the assessed value?
Because that's going back to the argument for you can't opt out conditionally. You can't just opt out for these large projects. If you opt out, you're also opting out for the residential market. These large projects, the shared solar projects, can survive with taxes because of those fixed fees and the economies of scale at play with dealing with a megawatt size scale project versus a 5 kilowatt scale project. For reference, a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. So it's a much larger system. The economies of scale at play there, taxing those projects or pilot for those projects will not necessarily make it cost prohibitive. For a lot of the residential market projects, taxing those projects will absolutely make it cost prohibitive for the homeowner to install the solar system in the first place. And you cannot opt out conditionally, so that's why the pilot is the tool for.
Is there any legislative move to try to address that? That seems like an important problem for municipalities.
To address which problem?
To address the issue of when you opt out, you affect the residential market as well. Because I think most municipalities would want to affect the residential market, but are concerned about these gigantic projects coming to their
Sure.
towns.
This is the legislation to address that. The pilot is the legislation to address that.
I mean, the concept of if you opt out of everything. That's what you're saying.
Right. If you officially opt out, if a municipality were to officially opt out, then you have to opt out of everything based on the state law. The mechanism for correcting that problem, to take care of these large projects, and this was relevant to wind too, because wind is also often large projects. So those megawatt projects had pilots even before the solar industry really took off in New York State. But this is the mechanism. This is the solution to that problem, to allow you to get tax revenue from large projects without harming the resident. That's what we have right now.
One more question. Most real property has 3 different taxing jurisdictions at a minimum. The school district, the town, and the county.
Right.
Can each of them separately opt out, and won't that create kind of mire for the solar? Like, for instance, the school district may opt out because it's the school district, and the town and the county might say, "Oh, we'll stay in and we'll do it, whatever with it." So wouldn't that really create a headache? Is there anything to draw that together so that it doesn't create this mishmash?
So are you talking about the website that lists who's opted out? So the website of folks who have opted out is online, but yes, I mean, to answer your question, it can be a pretty chaotic thing where you're kind of 3 different opt-outs all within your same jurisdiction. That is not common, but not completely. I think there's a county in Western New York that has a similar thing of at least 2. The county
The reason I
and
raised it,
the
we
municipality.
actually had a client who, one of the jurisdictions opted out, and that was the school district. And the other 2 didn't. And he thought they were all opted out. He'd been told they were all opted out. Put it in, and even with just one opt-out, after you put it in, it wasn't financially viable for him. And he's paying another $800 in school tax, and that's the difference between this thing being viable and not viable. So one jurisdiction opting out, if it's the big one, like the school tax, can really affect a residential solar project.
There we go.
I raised that because up in just a single jurisdiction of the three can really do damage to the project.
And thank you for bringing that up. They're direct evidence of the point that I'm trying to make, and the fact that it has happened, and someone in the room knows that that has happened. That is the point. That's the economic argument. It really has these real-life effects on residences. And the way to get revenue from these larger solar farms that are coming in is to require these pilots. Just one more.
Just a quick point. We did start later than we originally had programmed, and I don't know if everyone in the room was able to adjust their schedules to that. He has a considerable amount of other material to go into, so while I think we should still have questions interspersed, we really need to not have 15 or 20 minutes of them. I have another point I'll make later, but I don't want to just break my own rule.
Sure. All right. Pilots also, the payment in lieu of taxes, may not exceed that 15-year term, because if you remember, the property tax exemption only exempts the system for 15 years. So the pilot needs to also only be 15 years because the municipality is getting taxes after that 15-year period. So the pilot cannot exceed the 15-year term so that you're not getting a pilot and tax revenue at the same time. That's basically the rationale behind that. You can see here we just have some examples. This is actually from Meister Consultants Group, who are based in Boston. There are partners on the PV Trainers Network. They put together, because shared solar has been a reality in Massachusetts for a little bit longer than New York, they've gotten to see more of these real-world playing out of land leases and pilots. So they put together this, this little chart of pilots in Massachusetts. So the money here, the figure here is price per megawatt. So in Holyoke, Massachusetts, if you had there's a 4.5 megawatt system at $5,000 for 20 years per megawatt. Now, if you see, this is Massachusetts, so they are allowed to go for 20 years. The policy is a little bit different, but the idea is the same. So, and as you see down at the other end, we've got a pilot for $17,000 per megawatt. So there is variance, and a lot of times what we get as a question is, how much should I charge for a pilot? What should I expect? And it's difficult to answer that question because there is a substantial amount of variance in what folks charge for a pilot. The only thing that directly governs how much you are able to charge for a pilot is that you are not allowed to charge more than you would have gotten through tax revenue. Other than that, it's kind of a gray area. Pilots that are too high may make a project not pencil out. Pilots that are too low, or pilots that are on the lower end, may get electricity into solar energy into your community at a cheaper price. There's just a lot of potential for variance. We gotta stop through. I'm sorry.
When it says a project size, 4.5 megawatts per month, per day, per year.
So that's the capacity. It's kind of it's tough to explain. 4.5 megawatts is the maximum capacity that system can produce. That's the size of it. But
that's at one time.
Right.
It's a different figure than kilowatt hours.
Right. And now we're going to get into shared solar, which is what brings us to the room. This is another, we have it in the incentives part of the slide deck. For a reason, we consider this an incentive from the state of New York for allowing community shared solar. I believe we're up to, I think, 7 states in the country that are allowing it right now. Might be wrong on that, might be slightly higher, but still not a majority of the country allow shared solar. New York is on the forefront in that sense. So what this does is Derek explained net metering and how when the system is on your roof, producing extra goes back out to the utility, the extra energy goes back out to the utility and you get a credit for that. What shared solar essentially is now the system doesn't need to be on your roof or hooked up to your meter. The system can be at a place in the community and then linked to your utility account, and it's producing the energy offsite and you're getting those credits on your utility account. This expands access to solar energy to renters, to folks with poor sites, shading issues, low energy usage. You can subscribe to as little or as much in a lot of scenarios of the solar installation as you would like. So if you don't have the energy usage in your home to justify putting a system, and especially a cost-effective system on your own roof, you can just buy, instead of a whole system, maybe buy 3 panels of a community shared installation. So the overall point is that this community shared solar idea opens up solar to a plethora of new people, new potential solar adopters. And I'm going to take a look through how shared solar works in New York. I'm just going to, well, maybe we can do this one by one. So this is the role. The sponsor constructs, owns, and operates the system. From there, the sponsor goes out and gets members to subscribe to the system. Then the members obviously pay the sponsor for subscriptions to the installation. The sponsor then provides that membership information to the utility so that the utility can distribute the credits into the right accounts for the folks who have subscribed to the installation. And then the excess generation from the large solar array, the shared solar system, goes out to the grid, and then the utility is issuing those credits as they're allocated by the sponsor. So that's how it works in a snapshot. I really love this, this image. I think it does a pretty good job of just in one little piece taking a very dense concept and making it clear. And if folks are interested in shared solar, as Adam said, these slides will be available. This one in particular is a great resource to have. So who can be a project sponsor? Any type of organization can sponsor a project or partner with a developer to sponsor a project. A solar developer could do that. There are quite a few in other states and more coming up in New York. A private organization could do that for a for-profit basis. They could invest essentially in a community shared solar installation, take responsibility for distributing the credits, and turn a profit. Municipality or government organization, less common to see that, but can be a sponsor. So if, for instance, City of Binghamton wanted to own and operate a shared solar array for community members in Binghamton, they would be in the sponsor role at that point. Or a nonprofit, maybe an environmental nonprofit. It's part of their mission to do this, that fits into their mission to be able to take on that sponsor role and increase solar adoption in the community by distributing those bill credits and maybe not turning a profit off of the installation. So there are a variety of ways that this can be done. But the responsibility of the project sponsor is always pretty much the same. Over the 20 to 30-year lifetime of the project, you would, one, obviously arrange for the development of the project and the installation. You would sell those shares, so as a sponsor, you would be responsible for collecting the members to subscribe to the installation. You would be responsible for managing customer turnover, so if somebody in your community is subscribed to your installation and they move out of the community, or they no longer want to be subscribed, then the sponsor would be responsible for getting that person out of the shared solar installation and finding someone new to take their place. You would also, your sponsor is also responsible for the relationship with the utility. So the customers, the subscribers, don't really interact with the utility except in the way they normally would, by paying their bill. The sponsor has the relationship with the utility. Sponsor lets the utility know which accounts to distribute these credits and how many credits to distribute these, how many credits go on each account. And then finally, any operations and maintenance over the lifetime of the system is also going to be the project sponsor's responsibility. Members, members can be pretty much anyone. A utility customer, the two rules for subscribing to a shared solar installation needs to be in the same utility jurisdiction and also in the same New York Independent System Operator load zone. Both things cover a large swaths of land in the state of New York. Those NISO zones most of them incorporate multiple counties, as do utility jurisdictions. These are large areas of land, so you can it doesn't necessarily need to be in your town square to subscribe to a shared solar installation. It just has to meet those two requirements: the utility jurisdiction and the NISO load zone. Why be a member? the big one for us, and the reason that I personally am so excited about shared solar, is that it expands access to clean energy. We can get more people to adopt solar energy and more people to get their power in a sustainable way by allowing them to draw power from somewhere that's not sited on their property. That's really exciting to me. And then also, while they're doing this, folks who subscribe are saving money on their electricity bills, and that's the main driver for a lot of folks who want to adopt solar and become a member to a shared solar installation or just adopt solar on their site. For low-income members, it's also a pretty exciting opportunity for shared solar. The LMI communities will be likely to be able to adopt solar a little more easily through shared solar, but there are a couple barriers to that that we've identified in the state of New York and need to be overcome. One, upfront payments can be more challenging for folks in LMI communities, and credit scores. There are often credit requirements to subscribe to a shared solar installation. Usually we see them hovering at mid-600s, and that could be a barrier for low to moderate income folks as well. There will be a statewide plan to encourage low-income participation in shared solar projects coming from NYSERDA, hoping for the summer of 2016, but it could be delayed into later in the year. There are some other rules around members. There need to be at least 10 members per shared solar installation. Each member needs to consume at least 1,000 kilowatt hours per year. Most people consume over 1,000 kilowatt hours per year, so that's kind of a low floor. You are not, as a member, you're not allowed to subscribe to more of the installation than will offset your historical usage. So if you're using 1,000 kilowatt hours, but you want to subscribe to 1,500 kilowatt hours, you cannot do that. It has to match up with your historical usage trends. Large electricity users, who are typically those demand meter buildings with a peak demand of 25 kilowatts, cannot take more than 40% of a project's output. So you can't have, if there's a large, say, sheet metal company that uses a lot of electricity, they can't have 80% of a shared solar installation and have 20% go out. The cap is 40% for high energy uses of 25 kilowatts or more. The role of the member is to select a shared solar package. There are different types of ownership, which Derek is going to get through with you in a minute. Then, as a member, you would provide your utility account information to the sponsor, who will then interface with the utility on your behalf. And then you gain access to that clean energy and save money on your electric bills. I'm going to try to breeze through this one as quickly as I can, because I feel like we already got a very good explanation of volumetric and monetary crediting. But this is just so you can see that, I guess. Put out non-demand meters, get volumetric credits, which is that kilowatt hour to kilowatt hour offset at the member's rate. So at your rate, if you're in a residence, you would get that residential rate for the kilowatt hour credit as opposed to the host site's rate. For demand meters, the crediting method is monetary, and you would likely see a non-demand meter installed, but technically you would be at the host retail rate.
I'm confused about this.
Okay.
Question, I apologize.
Sure.
So is this based on the meter that's in place prior to the installation, right, of the solar panels?
It could be.
Couldn't you put in a new non-demand meter?
Absolutely.
Okay, then I don't get it.
That's what.
So he looks at me on and
Well, I'll talk to you afterwards. I'll buy you.
I think
it's gonna take a while to explain
that's-
this, draw charts.
That's why I kind of went through that.
Got it.
We'll be here afterwards. We'd be more than happy, but that's definitely more of a one-on-one conversation than a.
Yeah, it's a very in-depth conversation.
Yes. So the sponsors will provide that percentage capacity to each subscriber. Credits not allocated can also roll over, like standard net metering. Any credits at the end of the year, or I'm sorry, when you withdraw from the installation, are forfeited. You can't take those with you if you're withdrawing. Members get their net metering credits allocated on a monthly basis from the utility. And it looks like we've covered everything else up there. And the image at the bottom is that the sponsor is sending the electricity to the utility, who's sending the credits to the members. We're really short on time.
Very quick question, yes or no?
Sure.
Have you an exemption from the Markham Act, which is the Blue Sky Law in New York? These look like they constitute securities under the Securities Exchange Act and the Blue Sky. Do you have an exemption for these in New York State?
So that's a really important consideration in shared solar, and that's, again, you would need an attorney or a tax specialist to be able to get those answers.
Thanks.
But for research purposes, Meister Consultants Group based in Boston has done a lot of work around securities issues for shared solar. Their website would be a good place to start.
I just want to say one thing. If you have cooperative, you're not subject.
So this is cooperative.
Right.
No, I'm saying if
You
you
do
have
it in cooperative form, okay.
Right.
Good point, thank you.
Yes, that
So
is.
a commercial version of this would actually be a issuance of securities?
Might be.
It could be if it's not structured accordingly. However, most of these investors and PPA providers, they structure these deals and these tax equity sides of these transactions to be in compliance with those securities. So that responsibility falls on whoever is your developer that's providing the PPAs to the municipality or the nonprofit.
There has been a letter ruling that was interpreted to mean this can be done from the IRS, but let's remember, this is really just.
Yes. So which is a different transaction that you don't have to.
And it's a really huge opportunity for landowners and customers alike, so we want to get it right.
If the company goes out of business and you've invested up front, what happens?
Are you talking, well, the investment side of it, right now, with a lot of these transactions that you're seeing are major corporations and investors with millions and millions of dollars from overseas or from out of state.
I've had an individual client call me who said he received an offer to participate in another money.
So we're actually going to have to take this and make it a sidebar because we are not going to get to the end. Okay, so we're going to forge it.
And again, we'll stick
that's why we
around
wanna have it.
afterwards. We don't have anywhere to go immediately. For any questions, be more than happy to talk at length after
There's
this.
some more basic stuff that some people in the room won't understand, and you're going straight to PhD.
Yes, so ownership models for community shared solar, try and rush through the next few slides. Essentially, really similar to, standard models of ownership for solar. You can have direct ownership where the customer actually purchases the actual equipment as a part of the solar system versus a lease or PPA offering coming from the solar company, and they pay directly to the solar company for the energy produced. So direct ownership will essentially be a customer making, depending on the agreements with the solar company. I've seen, for example, like maybe 3 module increments offered to customers from a community shared solar site. So maybe they have 100 panels at the site, and this is just a brief example. Then they sell to a customer 3 modules worth of solar, and they get that equivalent for how much those 3 solar panels produce for the energy that gets net metered into their residential bills. There can be financing options from companies where you have a certain term, maybe 15 years, 20 years, hopefully good interest rates, and it's more beneficial to homeowners that can actually afford the cost up front for directly purchasing equipment. And this is in comparison to third-party ownership, where instead of owning pieces of the equipment, they are only responsible for payments of the energy produced by the system. So depending on the billing method, hopefully it'll be the easier direct kilowatt to kilowatt conversion, and then the homeowner would just pay that amount of money to the solar installation company. So pricing structures, you can have upfront payments where through direct ownership, someone would purchase the actual amount that the equipment costs, and then receive the benefits of the system for the actual equipment that they purchased, versus a power purchase agreement or lease where in a power purchase agreement you would pay the solar system owner, the developer, the amount of kilowatts that you're receiving, or a lease would be an agreement over the course of the system, maybe 20, 25 years, and you pay a flat monthly payment for that. But yet the developer still owns the actual equipment in that case. So just some graph and visual representations of different pricing structures. And this would actually apply to the third-party ownership models, either PPAs or leases, where if you have a flat rate agreement with the owner of the system, then they offer you, say, 15 cents a kilowatt hour, as in the first example. That's the price that you're going to pay over the term of the contract for the next 20 plus years. And of course, the electric utility rates are variable within that time frame, where you can have 1 year be high utility rates, 1 year be low utility rates, but over the course of the contract term, you would have that guaranteed locked-in rate and be saving money in that way. That's compared to an escalating rate where, since you can generally assume that utility prices will increase, I think averages are between 2 to 5% a year. Again, each individual year can be variable. You'll have higher electricity prices 1 year, lower another year. That can be variable each year, versus the overall trend of utility rates increase about 2 to 3% a year. So the escalating rate would be, you start off at a lower rate than you currently pay to your utility, but you have an escalation of probably around a couple percent, hopefully. And over the course of the 20-year contract, then you would be you'd be paying a higher amount for your electricity price, but that would hopefully be lower than the increase in the utility prices. And then the easiest way to have a PPA would be discount to retail, and that's just, no matter what the price is in any given year, you will be paying a percent less. So maybe you would be offered 90% utility rate that you would pay each year. So no matter what the price is, you would be guaranteed to be paying less. And there's different positives for each, different negatives for each. But in general, PPAs are really enticing for individuals because they don't have to make those upfront payments for the actual equipment, and they can start saving on their utility bills right away.
Are these considered tariffs? I mean, do you have to register them with the Service Commission, and can you vary or discriminate, who you offer what rate to?
So I don't know specifically of how they're considered in terms of a tariff, but it can be offered in any way depending on the actual developer. The installation company can choose whichever way they would like to do, and if a customer signs up for that, then I mean, it's just in terms of what's more cost-benefit analysis for the actual homeowner.
One thing to add, there is a model that, for example, if you have a congregation that's doing this, you can have the richer members of the congregation pay a higher rate than the poorer ones in order that everybody's in. So you can't have those variables. You can, yeah.
So a couple more caveats into the different types of ownership. Of course, since if you're a direct owner and you pay for the upfront cost of the system, then you'll have to wait until those costs are recouped over the savings of the electricity rates. So that might be 10 years down the line, you actually pay back the cost of the equipment that you purchased, and then you start getting the actual worth of the electricity produced. But of course, again, you can have different financing mechanisms for that. And for third-party ownership, again, kind of touched on it already, but you can immediately start getting those savings without having to go through that X amount of years to recoup the cost of purchasing the equipment. So overall, there are a lot of different terms that different companies would try to put on for their contracts, and these are a lot of questions to go through to keep in mind when you are reviewing contracts offered to you by different companies. So again, pluses and minuses for each type of system. lot of it can depend on if you have money up front and what your goals are for saving money or getting your energy from renewable systems. So overview here.
All right, now we're going to take a little dive into shared solar for municipality. It's an opportunity for municipalities to become involved in the solar market. It's kind of an addition to remote net metering in that sense. Remote net metering has been utilized by municipalities throughout the state, and we're hoping to see municipalities really utilize community shared solar as well. This shared solar is an opportunity for the municipality to expand that access to solar throughout the community. They can obtain savings for both the ratepayers in the community and for the municipality if the municipality were to subscribe to a shared solar installation. There could be some bill savings there, and we've seen that certain developers for shared solar will even offer lower rates to municipalities than to homeowners, and the reason for that is because the municipality is paying less for the energy than the homeowner, so the rate needs to be lower for them for a good cost proposition or value proposition for the municipality. And as we discussed briefly before, municipalities can also be the sponsor of a shared solar project, or this is pretty common and we expect it to be more common, use municipal land to host a shared solar project. So a lot of brownfields and landfills seem to be good areas for that type of thing, where you have this area that is not contributing anything, and you site a solar installation on this large space. Municipalities, as I said, can also become a member as a subscriber to a shared solar project, as well as be a sponsor. And then also, we've touched on this briefly, zoning. That's a huge way that the municipality can be involved in the solar market. And if folks are interested in zoning, really encourage you one more time to come to Jessica Bacher's presentation right here on June 29th. And also, Sustainable CUNY has that model zoning law that is it's about a 40-page guide to zoning ordinance for solar. It's New York specific, so that's a very valuable resource if folks are interested in zoning issues and working through the municipality. And take a look at shared solar for private landowners. The big draw for a private landowner is obviously to lease their land and get that revenue that the solar developer is paying them for the use of their land. That will help to diversify the income stream. The private landowner can also subscribe to the installation and lower their energy bills. And it can also, as we discussed when we were talking about the real property tax exemption, it can really boost the local economy. So for a private landowner to be able to site a large project like this could be a little shot in the arm to the local economy. And landowners obviously can use their land to host a site and also typically subscribe to an installation. So we want to take you through the shared solar development project because these are large projects and they are pretty big investments. So we want to give you a few considerations when looking toward shared solar. The first step is stakeholder engagement and goal setting. So what are the goals for the shared solar installation? What would you like to accomplish? And who are the players in the market who you can partner with to have that happen? Doing that background research is incredibly valuable to the shared solar procurement process. And then you would want to move on to data collection and site identification. We'll use the example of a municipality looking to host a shared solar project, which we're actually through PV Trainers Network in the town of North Hempstead on Long Island. They are in this data collection and site identification process now. They actually reached out to the PV Trainers Network and sent Derek a list of municipal-owned land in town of North Hempstead, and Derek is designing layouts for what a solar installation would look like on those properties, and about how much energy they would be able to generate and what it would look like. So that's site identification and data collection, and a really great example of it. That's what that step is, and it's a very important step. The other thing you would need to analyze is where utility substations are located in order to interconnect to the grid without without cost prohibitive improvements to the grid. Then, like any procurement, you would want to develop and publish a request for proposals, just outlining your goals, outlining your sites, and letting developers and installers know what you would like to see from them and what you're really looking for. And then, obviously, carefully and meticulously reviewing those proposals and reviewing the bids. And again, PVTN offers consulting advice on this. So if you are in a position of reviewing a bid and would like an outside perspective on that, feel free to reach out to PVTN. That's part of what we do. Recently, with the town of Tonawanda, PVTN walked the municipality through this entire process. Not for a shared solar installation, but for a municipal procurement. My colleague Ryan Cook from Meister Consultants Group just walked through the entire process with them from start to finish. So reviewing bids and selecting a developer, that is something that PVTN would definitely be willing to help with if folks find themselves in that position. And then finally, you would want to negotiate your contract with the shared solar developer installer. You would also want to know system size and expected generation. What is your usage versus how much can you offset with this proposed system from the developer? It's very, very important to know the financials and the rates are all based on that information. And you would also want to see detailed plans for construction. Obviously, this is a big project, and you want to know, you don't want any surprises, or at least what is your usage versus how much you mitigate those offset with this proposed system from the developer. It's very, very important to know.